Okay, so I thought today we could, since it's the end of the year and we've covered so much over the year, I thought we'd have a little bit of a review about human skills and leadership. So I went through all of the presentations and had a look at you know, what was important. Could have been twice as long, obviously, or three times as long, but I thought maybe these are the things that help us remember why we're human beings and not human doings, and why these skills are so important in leadership. Okay, so today's topic is looking back and looking forward, because you can't look back without also looking at what's in front of you, using what you've learned. Take it from a historian, that's really important. All right, so what are human skills? They are what we need to interact, to communicate, and to have the relationship with others, especially when we are in a collaborative environment, which is what a team is. So, and that doesn't matter whether you've got people working for you in your organization or whether you work with people in other organizations. We are not islands. We always work with other people. And what I love is that whenever I work with people in a professional context, they transfer the skills also in a personal context, and the other way around. So we're one person in every context. And I always find it sad when somebody says to me, you should know me in my personal life. I'm a very different person. And my goal is always to say authenticity is really important for your well-being. Anyway, so what's a leader and what's leadership? It starts always with self-leadership. I had a client yesterday who said, I don't really have anybody working for me at the moment. I said, doesn't matter. You're leading yourself, and that's what's really important. And you will transfer that into other contexts. So it's all about a growth mindset. And your goal is always to make yourself redundant, but not irrelevant. And I get a lot of people who say, but if I'm redundant, then nobody will need me. You may remember my presentation where I talk about making fruit salad. So it's not about you cutting up the bananas and the apples. It's about you developing the new recipes and making sure that the marketing and all of the strategy is in place as a business owner. And then in the process of that, create new competent leaders, so that you can definitely make yourself redundant at some point and hopefully sell your business for lots more money because you've got some really good people to replace you. Okay, so leadership competencies, I'm just listing them all there. It's all about emotional intelligence is really important, but it's about creating a culture. It's about vision. It's about being able to motivate people. I don't know where that came from, but anyway, and then one of the things that I find really interesting is that we're avoiding a lot of difficult conversations these days. So knowing how to have these conversations is what builds trust. Because when we come from that place of I'm here to deal with what doesn't work, then we can turn that into something that works better in the future. Then we talk about listening, because before you actually communicate, listening is really important. As Alan always says, we have 2 ears, 2 eyes, 1 mouth, use them in proportion. So listening is really at the foundation of everything, because it's all about being able to appreciate what somebody's saying, but also understand them and being able to support that. And that's where leadership really starts. The average person listens for 9 seconds before they make a suggestion. How much information can you gather in 9 seconds? Not that much. So when you know how to listen properly, you will find that people talk more, funnily enough. So one of the things that we come across a lot these days is pretend listening. And you know what that's about. We don't know what we should do first, so we try to do both at the same time. We split our attention. We're not really present. We start moving around in a way that really confuses people because our body language is not in alignment with what we say. And then often, of course, there's a phone involved or a computer or anything like that. And once the attention goes to that, we can't really be present at all anymore. And as a consequence of that, we're really disconnected. So this is the irony. We're more connected than ever before, but we're also really disconnected. So when you really are able to listen, you will find that your connection with people grows, and you will find that people come to you more with issues before they become issues. And so your leadership becomes much easier because people will be more accountable, and they will also be able to take into consideration what the consequences of their actions are, because they know you don't blame them or you don't avoid them. Okay, body language we're all familiar with. So it's the ability to utilize our 55% of our communication to really connect with people. And the fastest way to actually get into rapport with somebody, which means our body language aligns, funnily enough, is through breathing. So if you find that you're getting into a situation where you start becoming and getting into a place where it's difficult to communicate with somebody, See what happens when you breathe at about the same rate as they do. Now, if they're breathing really hard and really fast, don't do that because you don't want to get into a place of hyperventilation, but you can somewhere meet in the middle. If you have any questions about that, talk to me because it's a really great tool. Then we have tonality, so you can speak really loudly or really soft. You can speak really high or really low. You can speak really quickly, which is what I tend to do, or really slow. Sometimes speaking really slow can trigger people because it can be perceived as very patronizing, so be aware of that. When you start, especially when you're having a really low pitch, it's a very parental thing to do. And then timbre, if it's sharp on top of that, then that can really trigger people. And then, of course, there's the really soft one. So be aware of how you do that because, again, some people don't deal with a very soft timbre really well. So be aware and look at how people respond to your language. Then we talked about language and we talked about the ability to make assumptions. And yes, it's the old adage, assumptions make an ass out of you and me. But what it leads to, it's really a lot of mind reading. We assume the person knows what we're talking about. So we don't fact check. We just assume that the other person knows what we're talking about. Frustration, confusion, and lots of drama. And then when there are misunderstandings, anything that can happen only leads to more drama. So the idea is to ask lots of questions. And so this is why I introduced the precision questioning model, if you remember. So it's about asking who first. I have had conversations with people who never defined who they were talking about. They were just talking about they, he, she. And then when we go into that assumption place, then we assume something that may not actually be the case. How? When somebody says do something how? Because that's not really a precision verb. Then, they are so much better than you. Better how specifically? And then we make these sweeping statements. You never do this. And then what you do is you just simply ask, never. Do you have to make sure that your tonality is light? Because if you go into never with that kind of sharp timbre, the person will probably feel judged at that point and not coming from that place of curiosity. And then, of course, there's when, where. So what challenges self-care? We talked about self-care next. And you wonder why all of this before we actually start talking about leadership. A lot of leaders forget that self-care comes first. So we just work so hard that we can't do anything anymore. Children take up all our time, which is perfectly okay because they don't know how to take care of their needs. But there's a place and a time for actually, what are they, helicoptering or snow plowing? So that's a whole different topic I can talk to you about for a long time. We have lots of change happening. So we're constantly like apps change all the time. We used to be able to go back and say, no, I prefer to keep the previous version. We can't do that anymore. We're being forced to upgrade all the time. Then there's not enough time because there isn't. And then we're just expected to be upbeat and happy all the time. That's false happiness because if we dare to show our emotions, God knows what would happen if we tell somebody we're not feeling great. And in a time where mental health is really at risk, it's important that we actually are authentic in how we do this. So our needs, boundaries, and emotions are really important. And if you want to know more about that, please watch session 2. Okay, and then of course there's this whole thing about other people first and we come second, which leads to the fact that we get great obituaries that says, oh, they were always there for other people, but damn, they died. I know that sounds really callous, but it isn't. We reward people for being selfless and we punish people for being selfish. So it's about finding the middle ground, and that's all about managing emotions, needs, and boundaries. This unhealthy selflessness can lead to all sorts of emotions. And what it does eventually, it will lead to disease. And so that kind of exhaustion that you see all the time, especially at this time of year, we are just going on and on about what's not working. So the important thing is also to be able to ask for help, which we don't want to do. We want to show that we're really autonomous and really competent because those are the two qualities we love as adults. But it's really important to know that we can only give what we can. We got to know when we need to stop. So in a nutshell, before you pour to other people, please pour for yourself first. Fill up your own jug. So then we talked about stress management and the fact that there are two different kinds of stress, eustress and distress, who look very similar, because you may feel nervous. You have all of the physical sensations that you have when your fight-flight system is triggered. But effectively, the difference is eustress, which is the positive stress that creates that sense of anticipation. As in, if we go back to Christmas, am I going to get the pony for Christmas? Am I going to get it or not? Whereas the stress is like, oh my God, what happens if I don't get the pony? What am I going to do? So just be aware of that, because when we have more eustress and we change things up, we break habits, we learn new skills, so we get into that growth mindset, we exercise and we set goals. What it does, it actually supports our immune system. It creates better connections. It really works for us. So then, of course, we talked about perfectionism because we all have really high expectations. So it's know what you can do and what you can't do and ask for help. And especially when we're business owners, we have the sense that we need to do everything ourselves. Empower the people around you, create your 2IC, make sure that you've got some people who can do things that you don't need to do. So delegate. And then remember, there is no work-life balance. It's a work-life integration, because when we can get into this place of adapting to change and making sure that sometimes one area needs more attention than the other, and we can accept that, our life becomes much easier because we see the interconnection. And what we start noticing is how these things support each other. So just know that there is no perfect balance. There will be always one area in your life that requires more attention than the other. And again, if you surround yourself with people who can support you when that happens, life will be much easier and you will find that you create better results at work. The other thing we talked about is that leadership has a ripple effect on your environment. There is something called an emotional contagion. So the way you manage your emotions will have an impact on people around you. So it doesn't mean you suppress your emotions, but it's a way of managing your emotions by sharing it with somebody you can trust, but leaving it out of the professional environment. So just notice the effect that you have on the people around you. So when you do that, you create that connection that not only supports positive relationships, but also better performance and, yes, overall well-being, because we literally impact each other's genes, which is a whole new topic. So if you've heard of epigenetics, you will know that the way we perceive the world and the way we interact with the world impacts our genes and our health and our immune system, our digestion, all of those. So as a leader, there's with great responsibility come, or what is it? With great powers come great responsibilities. That's what we're talking about. So it's all about, these are the things that we need in order to build a high-performing and an enduring team where people want to stay around, because job hopping is just so prevalent at the moment. So when we get into this place where we create the sense of belonging, where people are committed and have a sense of purpose, where we can be authentic with each other and where we support each other, people will stay around. And so we talked about this before. So these are the autonomy, competence, and well-being. These are core adult needs. And we need to create this culture as leaders to support these needs. We're not responsible for them. Let's be really clear about that. Your job is not to manage people, but it's support. There's a really big difference about that. One is care for and the other one is care about. But the thing is, you got to demonstrate that you care for yourself so you can care about others. So this is what creates a sustainable culture, because we talk about guidelines, which we never really express. We always assume that culture is something that just happens. But when we know what the guidelines are, when we have determined what the boundaries are and how we deal with situations and how we interact with each other, we all benefit. These are all the characteristics of a functional team. So again, we talk about care about, not care for. It's all about shared commitments and it's about goals, and really important, it's about mutual respect. And that is, you remember, we talked about the ability to deal with people from that adult to adult level rather than treating people like children, which is often what happens. So this is the old traditional leadership model. This is where the boss at the top determines how people at the bottom, the people, the team members, how they should behave. So where we talked about balancing empathy and efficiency, because a lot of people think that when they lead with empathy, they lose all efficiency because they just come across as too soft. Whereas when we balance that, your leadership style impacts on balancing. And again, we talked about balancing lifestyle and work. That's a very different thing. But empathy and effectiveness, you can balance. You can keep your eye on the goal, making sure that somebody's accountable while being able to manage that with empathy and compassion. So next time we're going to talk about feedback and fostering a culture of competence. So that's something that I thought would be great at the beginning of the year when we set our goals and when we go into how can I actually create this culture. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela. Okay, anybody got any questions for Angela at all?